Here we go. We're live. Hello, Joshua. How are you doing?
Jens, good to be back with you, and I'm pleased that we've back on track with these Friday live reverse mentor sessions. I'm also a bit wary because you're back from your holiday and you've been straight back into things this week, but it also means that your mind's rested. So I'm probably going to be caught on my toes here, but in this conversation.
Yeah, let's see. Let's say hello to the audience. So, hello and welcome to the Reverse Mentorship Friday session, which is always our live session from the Reverse Mentor Lab podcast, or ecosystem, however we want to call it. So,
Yeah, well,
what are we going to talk about today?
maybe before jumping into what we've got on the cards to chat
Uh,
about today, Jens, is really just to ramble a bit, just in terms of getting our minds going and things like that, and warming ourselves up. So it's Friday. It's been quite a heavy brain week. As
oh
Jens
yeah,
and I have been working on some exciting things, and we hope to touch base with those and connect a few dots and build out a few puzzle pieces over the coming weeks. And one of the biggest things is we're really passionate is about people. And you might say, okay, but how are you warming up talking about people? And I think, yesterday we had a call in the evening, and the call and the conversation really started around a t-shirt. And this was a call with a bunch of executives, and there was a theme, and Jens will no doubt say that he had a map behind this whole to guide the conversation and things like that, and he probably did. But it was just amazing for me as a young thinker in that space to see how something as simple as picking up on a hodl or a holding Bitcoin t-shirt
yeah.
generated this entire conversation, which we chatted for 70 minutes about. And it was just quite remarkable just to see all these different strings and different threads that came up inside of that space. And I think that that's something that we're hoping to also look at how we can connect different generations inside the Reverse Mentor Lab, being the experienced thinkers and the young thinkers, and really seeing how that melting pot of ideas and different way of looking at the world can generate value for you.
Yeah. Love that example with the t-shirt, because that's one of the things I learned and read about, like, I don't know, it's like years ago, when it was about networking. So if you're going into a conference, or if you want to engage with people, if you have something that's slightly different, or that's kind of an eye catcher, then that's a starting point for a conversation. And if we just take the t-shirt examples, like I have my t-shirt stuff always on, and people are just like, what does that mean? What does connector mean? And then you have a starting point. So you're easily approachable for people who are in the room, instead of you being the same like all others. You have something very, very small. Or if you just watch my watch, like I have a light blue watch bracelet, and that's like I get asked about that in conferences, because like even if you wear a little bit like more business style stuff, and then you are having like a light blue watch, which nobody else would ever do. But that's a conversation starter, and that's, I think, also something when we go to our topic today, which is also like, how do you design things, how do you do things with intention? And maybe yesterday the t-shirt was not with intention, but in the end it was a great icebreaker to get a conversation going, which was very, very rich on comments and interesting thought provoking topics. And it went, like you said, I don't know, 70 minutes, quite a long
Yeah.
time. Was really cool.
Yeah, so Jens, I think it's a perfect intro into what we've got lined up today, and that's why I just wanted to mention it before we sort of dived into the topic, because it might not have been with intention, but I think doing things with intentionality, and you use two great examples,
Yeah.
about wearing a t-shirt with intention, or putting yourself in situations where you're doing something with intention to hopefully achieve or to work towards an outcome. And that's what we're really looking to unpack today. And so in a formal sense, the topic that we've picked is doing and designing things with intention, the difference in successfully creating change. And Jens, you and I both, like I mentioned already, we've spent a couple of hours this week looking at what is the intention of things, why are we doing it, what is the value that we're hoping to create. And in this fast-paced world that we live in, and there's always lots of things on the go. And I think sometimes we just need to maybe take a step back before we interact or before we engage with something and say, what is the intention that we're doing this? Why are we doing it? And how can we either do it differently? How can we design it? Or what are we hoping to achieve from interacting in this way?
Yeah, and one practical example is like we did a training this week where Joshua and I helped the corporation training and organizing meetings and so on. And that's part of a bigger change program. But the interesting part, what we did as well, is like explaining and teaching the people on the call or inside the training is that you do things with intention. That's why I love this topic as well for today, because even organizing a Zoom call, and that was one of the examples we used inside the training, if you do this with intention, it is a completely different outcome than if you just, hey, we need to meet up, and yeah, let's send out a Zoom call to 200 people and then see who is popping up. And specifically for me in the business world, it's super important. And that's not just with meetings, it's like with everything you do. If you do things with intention, if you have a direction where you want to be and where you want to go, and then you look into, does this, what we are trying to do right now, fit to that purpose, fit to that direction? And if not, do we really need to do that? And if yes, then do it with intention and say, hey, this is not helping us to get there, but I want to do it because of.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's go.
Spot on, Jens. And I think I'll jump in here with another practical example. So in this virtual world, I think a lot of us are spending time, trying to connect with one another, trying to design these experiences, trying to learn from one another, and doing that in person. And Jens and I touched base after this workshop yesterday, and he said one of the things that he used to do when running these types of workshops in person is he used to learn from the reactions that he received from people. He used to pay very close attention to that. And I think in this digital world, in this 2D environment that we've created for ourselves, it's quite hard to do that. And we need to look at different ways. We need to design different ways to get that same interaction that we're looking for, so that we ourselves can learn from the feedback, so that we know how to respond to those situations. And here's this, you may hear this example and say, hey, hang on, it's a bit silly. But the example that I'll give is when Jens and I use a tool called Mural. And Mural is essentially a digital whiteboard that allows multiple participation or multiple participants rather to participate on it at the same time. And we often start off these sessions with a check-in question. And inside running these sessions, you may have heard the term icebreaker. And it's not so much an icebreaker the way that I think about it. It's more like, what can that question help me understand about the individual? So a simple example was I was running a workshop with these young thinkers, and I asked them what is their favorite drink to have on their summer holiday. And now bearing in mind that it's summer in Europe at the moment, and a lot of these young thinkers were going on holiday. And there were various responses that came back. And I used that question at the end of the workshop, and I said, jokingly, they thought, but I was actually being quite intentional about it, is I now know what to buy you guys when I meet you in person the next time I see you at a bar. Or I know now what to buy you next time you have a birthday, because I know that so-and-so likes red wine, or so-and-so's favorite gin is X. Yeah. And those little things inside of an exchange can often unlock a different level of value and a longer lasting or a piece of value inside of a feedback framework, which you can then use in your thinking to do things with intention going forward.
Yeah, and I think there are two parts of what you just said, and I want to highlight that a little bit. One thing is doing it with intention, and then designing it. Because what I'm a very, very big fan of is like designing things where you say, I want to create an environment where, let's say, I want to create an environment where people feel well, where people behave in a certain way, where people interact in a certain way. And doing this with intention, where I say, hey, I want to create an outcome. This is what my goal of this Zoom meeting. How do I do that? How do I design that I create the feelings and create the behaviors and enable the interactions? And I think this two important topics is doing it with intention, but also designing it and doing it before you start. Not just, hey, let's do the meeting and jump on the call and you're unprepared. And you don't really focus on getting the outcome.
Yeah. So if we just double click on that for a moment and we say, what is the difference between doing something with intention and designing something with an intention? So you may be sitting here and listening to this, whether you're listening to it live or in a recorded format on our podcast, and say, hang on, I always think that I do things with intention. I'm putting myself in that situation, and that means that I'm doing it with intention.
Hmm.
Sure, you may be doing that, but if you don't think about designing for intention or designing with an intention in mind, it often means that you'll go into situations thinking you're prepared, but not actually analyzing what you want to do with what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's a crucial part in terms of why we've put these two concepts together, intention and design. You might think of them, like I said, as separate siloed instances or entities. But if you put them together, that's often where the true magic can be unlocked, is because you're actually thinking through a system in its entirety, thinking about the feedback that you're receiving, whether it be from young thinkers, experienced thinkers, or even people in an external environment, a consultant that you're bringing into an organization. How are you designing with intention, and what does that mean from an unlock perspective, and how you can use that in your own thinking, but also to unlock it from a group success perspective.
Yeah. And looping that back to what you said very, very early in the beginning today of the recording or live show, not recording. People. Um, if we go back to the business setting, yes, you're doing meetings, you're doing organizational things, and you want to create a business outcome. And that's all fine, but it's all about the people, because the people inside your business, the people connected to your business, they're creating the outcomes. It's not the process, it's not the machinery 99.9% of the time. Even if there's a machine, it's the people who are programming it, the people who are working with it, creating the outcome or creating the environment of it. So when we always talk doing designing and doing that with intention, it's all about how do you engage with the people and enable the people you engage with to do something, to feel something, to behave in a certain way. And that's the overarching thing for us, where we always talk about is generational exchange and generational learning, where we say the leaders of today learning from the leaders of tomorrow. It's people. And if you do this with intention to how do I get a group of people or one person behave and feeling certain things, and then in the like after effect of that act in a certain way, that's when you do things with intention. It's not, yeah, I push this person into a corner and then this person is doing something. It's like I support this person in a certain way, and then they will do the task that support the business outcome in a way better way. And that's, if I just remember back into my corporate world, that's not often happening. Specifically now, I mean, we have a couple of clients together where we just see they're running from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. It's 8, 9, 12 hour days, and literally like zero breaks in between. And nobody is prepared to jump into the next meeting. Everyone is just jumping into the next meeting. It's 15 minutes like, oh, next meeting. Who is here? What was the topic again? Instead of intentionally designing the meetings to say, hey, let's group us into what is this meeting about? Let's breathe a little bit. Let's spend time with each other. Let's focus on the individuals, not the business outcome. Because for me, the business outcome is always the effect of what you're doing. It's not I would even say it's not the purpose, but that's discussable or debatable.
Yeah, that's another rabbit hole that we'll have to go down
Uh,
in a future conversation for sure. But Jens, just what you mentioned there, and around the word that pops up into my mind is levels and lessons from software. And for those who aren't too familiar with the concept of software, it's basically the way systems operate. And if you think about lessons from software and why I'm bringing this in here, is because there's certain levels inside of it. And in the past, software was run in sort of a very centralized system. And then they started to break software up in terms of what they call microprocessors. So a big system used to be all tied together, and then eventually, as it got bigger and bigger, it became slower and slower. And if you use the example of meetings that you threw out, there was, you might think that you're being productive because you're going 8 to 9 to 10 hours back to back to back meetings. But that means that your processing power is sort of building up and is becoming slower and slower and slower. Now, if you intentionally design your day in that way, you will max out. So a software system will max out at some stage based on the number of records, the processing power, the quality of the query that's been written, etc. But if you break it up and you break it up into microprocesses, and I know Jens, you're a big fan of this in terms of breaking up your diary and the way that you spend your days, you're almost breaking up and making it more efficient because you're giving yourself inside of the software structure different microprocesses are different for different responsibilities. And so if you have an example, if you think this microprocess needs to finish to inform this microprocess. So A needs to finish to inform B. Once B is finished, then the next process inside of the system can trigger. That means that you can do things quicker and with more speed and more efficiency. So now if you think about that inside of a team setting, and what we're talking about here is designing with intention or intentionally doing something, how can you bring that into a team setting? How can you level up or empower or enable people inside of your team so that all of the processing power doesn't sit with you? You don't become just the bottleneck. And if you think about what that means from a people perspective, again, you are helping people to grow, you're helping to enable them, you're giving them the right tools so that they can do their best work, but you're also providing a platform and building out this system of software that can then start to work in interesting ways when all of these microprocessing pieces come together and start making magic. And I know that might be a bit of a far out there example, and many people would say, geez, Josh, are you already living in the metaverse because you're comparing us to software? It's not too close, but I'm just really just wanting to use an analogy that can help to elaborate some of the thinking that we're putting down today.
Yeah, love that. If we humanize the whole thing, and you touched between the lines already on it, at least for the people who know you, the empowerment. So if you're a leader, and we talked about that during this week as well, if you're a leader and you're designing something with intention, you're the person who is guiding and facilitating the interaction. And that's again is all about the empowerment, because specifically in the world where we are heading, I mean, the world is rapidly changing right now, even though that we most of us are not aware of it. But we're now literally approaching 1.5 years in kind of lockdown pandemic state. A lot of people are working from home. So the whole work environment has changed dramatically. The behaviors of people are changing on how you work, how you interact with each other. Like if we just take the two of us, we have never met in person, and we are running a business together and a podcast. But it's about the empowerment where you as a leader, if you're like the formal manager and then supposed to be the leader of the team as well, is how do you build trust? How do you empower your team members I always go back to the meeting, but it's more about how do you empower your team members in a day-to-day setting, where you enable them to do things differently, where you engage with them to do things differently, because in the end, you can make the difference if you empower them to do the task in a better way, if you empower them to take decisions. And specifically in the changing world we are in, it's getting more important, because the big organizations who are structured in a silo organization, many of them are structured in a silo organization where it's about, hey, we're working in the sales organization, and if you work in sales, you have to do this task. If we now look into the distributed workforce model where we're like literally heading right now, because people are sitting in different locations, people are working in different places, you need to work in an empowerment setting where it's not about you, the manager, is deciding everything. It's more about you, the manager or the leader, is supporting the organization to grow by empowering the people. And that's going back to designing and doing things with intentions, what are you as a leader, and specifically now for the people who are in a management position right now, what are you doing day to day to day to day to empower your people, doing this with intention to create better outcomes for the company and of course for the purpose your business has? Very important for me. It goes back to, it's all about people, but it's more about, if you want to be future fit and if you want to create a business that is future fit, you need to start right now. If you haven't started, you're already late. And that goes back into generational exchange, reverse mentorship, and so on.
Most definitely, Jens. And I think just to pick up with where you left off there on bringing it back to this generational exchange and sort of the reverse mentorship models that we're building out inside of the Reverse Mentor Lab. And it's a way of thinking, yes, but it's also a way to help you as an individual unlock what you are capable of, whether that be a young thinker or an experienced thinker. And I think where my mind goes with this is, you already mentioned it around, these big organizations, these big corporate environments where they've almost centralized control to manage risk. And if you think about what that means in terms of the speed with which you can move, the speed with which you can adapt to things, it's slow. There's no other way to describe it, really.
Yeah.
And how have now models, there are those intrapreneurship models that have been thought of where you bring an entrepreneurial team into a big corporation, and it's called intrapreneurship, to try and drive some of their energy, to try and drive some of their ways of thinking and ingrain it into the organizational culture going forward. But it's almost like there needs to be a bigger shift. And the bigger shift needs to come around, and again, I'll go back to sort of lessons from software, is around how have those bigger systems been broken up to create these microprocessing environments that you can have with inside of a team. That doesn't mean that you are foregoing centralized control and foregoing your overall risk management metrics or measures. You're just doing it in a slightly different way. And if you now link that back to Jens, what you're saying about people, I think it becomes quite fascinating, because you're putting trust in people and you're putting trust in their decision making, and you almost are saying that what you're bringing into the bigger management team needs to be of a specific level or specific level of quality in order for me to make that decision going forward. And I think that that's something that's quite exciting when I think about intentionally designing a system like that. If you now think big and you say, I'm in a management situation inside of a big corporation, and you could even just start small. You don't need to start big. You could start with your team that you're responsible for. Or maybe you're a young thinker coming into an organization. How can you go about this way of thinking and work with, maybe it's just the resources that you're using on a day-to-day basis. You're designing that with intention. Or maybe you're drip feeding this sort of change in way of thinking into the overall organization. How are you going about doing that? And I think that's something, that we mentioned around. Jens and I spent a lot of time and a lot of brain power this week in terms of trying to tackle some of these big questions for ourselves. And that's done with an intention. So now if you're working on yourself, and we did a podcast about this, about, doing the hard work, is it's maybe there's lots of similarities in this space, but it really comes in, I think the key word here is designing it. You're really designing with intention to try and unlock that.
Yeah. And just looping it back to the leaders of today learning from the leaders of tomorrow, it's building trust. And you mentioned as well motivation. It's like it creates motivation. So if you do these things where you empower people and they are able to do things differently, they're able to bring their whole self to work, which is another very, very important aspect. And your business will thrive in a completely different way than it is right now. And it might take more time in the beginning to get there, but I think it's like the most wonderful thing I have seen in my work career, where you have a manager that trusts you, that's empowering you, that does things with intentions. And then if you look into, and that's equally important for experienced thinkers and young thinkers, the personal development that comes out of that. So if you're, let's say, if we just look formally, if you're the experienced thinker and you're the leader, leader of today, if you do this, you will grow tremendously in the way you empower people, because you do things differently, because you're not just delegating tasks, you're delegating responsibility, you work with them in an empowerment setting, and you do that with intention and you design it. And then from the other perspective, the young thinker is growing in the same way, because they get more, or you get more tasks, you get more responsibility, you get more decision opportunities, you get more feedback mechanisms for yourself and for the other person. So both sides can only win. um which for me is like key point.
Definitely a key point, and to again build on what you put down there, Jens, about it being a key point, is that notion of feedback.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes when we think about things, is, you can think change does happen naturally, but what does it mean for evolution, and how do you go about being intentional about your evolution? So if you think about what you mentioned here about you as a leader of today, motivating or enabling or trusting young thinkers of today, so leaders of tomorrow, to go about learning through failing, but also learning through doing.
Hmm.
Because if you hold on to that control for a huge amount of time, those young thinkers aren't going to evolve as quickly as they could. And it also means that you potentially won't evolve as quickly as you can. Because what other things should you be releasing from your immediate control, delegating to another thinker inside of this space or inside of your organization, so that you can then apply your mind and focus on different areas that you should be focusing on and where your mind needs to be being worked on. So I think sometimes that's one of the biggest things, is when we think about control and we think about change, is we want to try and control things, and we want to control everything. But there's a saying, and a good friend and mentor of mine has the saying of hold on lightly, not tightly. And I think that comes back to, again, being intentional and designing the way that you're wanting to enable people, wanting to trust them, wanting to motivate them to grow and to step into what they're capable of. And I think that that's something that I've certainly benefited from, is leaders of today that have really made an intention in giving me opportunities and allowing me to step into those spaces where, yes, it was very uncomfortable and often very challenging at times, but it's what allowed me to grow. And I think that that's something that leaders of today can think about, and leaders of tomorrow, the young thinkers, should think about, what are you doing with intention? Are you wanting to step into that space? And how are you going about creating that intention and designing your own thinking and own career trajectory by interacting with the leaders of today? And if you just look at the example of how Jens and I met, we haven't met in person, but we both have learned to work together. We've both worked through different situations and done that with intention. And so, yeah, there's lots of rabbit holes that I'm sure that we can go down here, Jens. But I'm going to throw the mic back to you and ask if you want to wrap up our live session today with some words of wisdom.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's wisdom, but at least wrapping it up. Now, I mean, you have already done a lot of the wrap up from a young thinker perspective. I think it's literally going back to the starting statement, which is like, how do you design things with intention? And maybe if we just add the person or the people aspect to that, it will unleash so much in organizations. And we talk a lot about business. It's the same equal valid for sport. It's the same equal. It's equally valid for other things in personal life. If you do things with intention, with the people you're engaging, if you start thinking about how do you design that, how do you design the interaction with your child, that might sound completely weird right now, but it's not about, hey, I'm sitting down and do like a huge mapping on a whiteboard or whatever. It's more about, okay, if we just take the example what happened with me every Friday, I'm going to the farmers market every Friday with my daughter, and she's like 3.5 years old, so it's not that she's 20 or something, where it's like we have interactions and talk deep stuff when we go to the farmers market. It's just like a habit we have created, and an event which we created, but it is designed. It's designed to spend time together. It's designed that we have always the same food, which is weird. We always have the same food when we go there, and we always spend um, similar time together, but it's super valuable for both of us, and we both learn. And that's where I say it's not just for the business part, though, that I believe every business will benefit on doing it. Having said that, what can leaders of today learn from the leaders of tomorrow is the topics we talk about. If you're interested in learning more about that, check out the podcast, listen to all other episodes, go to the YouTube channel, go to the website xyzplayground.com, where we have like the window to our world, and engage with us. We are happy to answer questions. We are happy to bring you onto the show, discuss things in details. And yes, every Friday we go live at 11 o'clock in the morning in Central European time. That's it.
Thanks, Jens. Another great get together, and yeah, one day I will get some fancy lighting like you have in your background for
Yeah,
those watching the videos. But
latest when you come to Germany and we sit both here and looking into the same camera. I have no idea how that's going to work, but let's figure that out in a month, hopefully, from now.
Yeah, that's what we'll do. We've been figuring it out. So Jens, thanks so much for your time. Super stoked
Thank you
to
too.
have learned from you, and we'll chat soon.
Yeah. See ya.